Welcome back to the Connected Realms podcast. This is episode 6, chapter 6 of the book Vampires Are. Chapter 6 has a number of quizzes to help us understand, are we vampires? So the first one is pretty quick and easy. There are 6 questions. Do you turn into a bat, a cat, dog, horse, something else? Are you the 7th son of a 7th son? Are you a wicked person? Do mirrors show no reflection of you? Does a crucifix or holy water frighten you? Does life seem to crumble during the daylight? Kaplan goes on to expound on, first of all, no, you're not a vampire if you answer yes to any of these. If you answer yes to are you wicked, maybe you have something to sort out with yourself, but you most definitely aren't a vampire and you have a big misunderstanding of what vampires actually are, because a lot of these are superstitious beliefs that come from quite religious societies throughout the ages. And he goes on to explain the significance of where these beliefs may come from. So turning into a bat or doing some other shape shifting generally comes from the notion that the vampires would arise from their graves in the middle of the night. They would have to enter homes to get to their victims. They couldn't enter them in standard ways because of locked doors or whatever. So besides being able to hypnotize people to get in, one method they imagined a vampire being able to utilize to get into a house in a sneaky manner was to simply turn into a bat and fly inside. So this could be what the very strong association with bats is, although obviously there's got to be a thoughtful connection between the fangs of a bat, the wings, the overall sinister perceived nature. I mean, bats are actually not bad. I like bats. They're very sweet. But people perceive bats as these nasty things. Plus bats, I mean, they do carry rabies. It could have been a whole lot worse in some place or some time with bats carrying rabies. So definitely that association with bats, it comes from definitive beliefs about how they must enter a home. But also, if you just think about it, it seems like common sense that humans throughout the ages would equate bats and vampires together because of those shared characteristics. And obviously, bats drink blood. I don't even think I mentioned that. So, okay, are you the 7th son of a 7th son? This would come from strictly superstitious beliefs, according to Kaplan. I don't think he found anything definitive to support where this idea would have come from, except that throughout time, across different cultures, there is a lot of heavy superstition without much logic behind it, involving numbers, and 7 is always a popular number. So for whatever reason, maybe they thought being the 7th son of a 7th son was a curse, and being a vampire was not a fun way to live. Now, that flows into the next one. Are you a wicked person? It does seem like throughout the various cultures, they're not perceiving vampires as being anything good to be, right? They perceive them as somewhat powerful, but mostly parasitic and miserable. They can only walk around at night. The sunlight probably hurts them. They can't be around religious, godly people or even objects. And this was used a lot to reinforce being a good person and adhering to religion. If you can get your society collectively and at the level of the individual to adhere to a religion, you keep the order, you keep the crime down, you keep the propensity for violence subdued, and everybody wins. Obviously, religion can be used to control people in bad ways as well, but this seems to have been a way to really dissuade people from letting their sort of lizard brain take over, because they used to say things like, if you kill someone and get away with it, you will become a vampire and you'll never rest. If you commit suicide, same thing. If you are an unchristened baby, same thing. If you detract from religion or are excommunicated from religion, you're a vampire. So it seems to be a very punitive thing that would happen if a person made a certain set of choices that were not of God. Does a crucifix or holy water frighten you? That feeds right into that. And mirrors showing no reflection of you. I don't see that Kaplan ever discovers where this comes from. I haven't yet stumbled upon where this comes from. Anyone interviewed in this book or elsewhere on this topic of mirrors says that it's ridiculous. They can always see their reflection in a mirror. The Count of Saint Germain purported to be a very real vampire. His reflection could always be seen, as far as I have read. So it is not yet understood by me where this notion comes from. But if I figure that out, as I continue to write and make videos about this topic, I will definitely let you know. And then does life seem to crumble during the daylight? I mean, it's a funny way to phrase the question, but this still is thought-provoking. Like, where does this notion come from? Kaplan goes on to suppose that, this, obviously comes from the religious notion of good is associated with light and evil is associated with darkness. But then I retort to that, well, yes, I could buy that, but also I would wonder, could it come from some very real creatures that might live underground and they don't like to come into the daylight? I don't know if it's because it hurts them or if they just like to operate at night because it's way easier, but it might have something to do with concrete flesh and blood realities. So he talks about, how do you kill a vampire? Usually they say you have to kill the brain and or the heart and then burn the body. This is really interesting because this also seems to persist throughout lore and legend. And I'm actually watching a show right now called The Strain. And it's a really sort of dark series on Hulu, if you want to watch it, about a vampire outbreak that happens in New York City. The vampires kind of sort of really want to take over. And so they just let it rip. And it's more like a zombie virus. And what happens is you get infected not by explicitly being bitten, but by worms infesting the host's body, getting into your body. So you don't even have to be bitten for a worm to crawl into you and then infect you with the virus. You are then a host, and then all of your human organs dissolve or get taken over by just this one big organ that's like a giant serpentine tongue, takes up the whole torso. The show goes into detail about that. You don't even need genitals anymore. You are just a vehicle, a host for the virus. And the virus is this big tongue thing that hops out of the mouth as soon as it sees a potential victim, and it latches onto their neck, drains them of their blood. If a worm gets in them, they will become a vampire, but it's not necessarily a one-to-one. Very interesting. And all that to say, the only way to kill those vampires in that show, indeed, is to sever their head. Then you must burn the body, because burning the body means burning the worms that are going to go on to infect more people. I'm a big fan of the notion that when they make certain movies, shows, and books, they're sort of telling you the truth a little bit, sprinkled with a lot of entertainment. So as I watch that show, read other books, and look at other sources, I have been wondering, okay, I think there's something to this sort of notion that you've got to burn the body if you find a vampire, because maybe it is just like a virus that's spreading, and the only way to get rid of it is to burn it. Finally, he discusses the staking of vampires as a commonly believed method of killing them once and for all. This seems to be correlated directly to historical events. So leaders such as Vlad the Impaler, but he was not the only one, would kill their victims and put them on stakes and display them for the enemy to see, or for any potential enemies to see, so that they would be so afraid of this psychotic Looney Tune staking people up their rear ends that they wouldn't even want to invade the village or the kingdom at all. There is a strong correlation between vampire myth and legend and figures like Vlad the Impaler. He was so masochistic and psychopathic that I think he was eating the flesh of his victims sometimes, or drinking blood here and there. I don't think he was a vampire, but you can see easily how he would be purported as a vampire throughout history, lore, and legend. So that's where the strong association to staking them to kill them might be. But to wrap this part of it up, Kaplan reminds us that no matter what the silly superstition or how random it seems, all of these beliefs still say a vampire is an entity that goes around needing human blood to survive. So that's the part that we need to keep focused on. And if that is what persists throughout all of these myths, these legends, these rumors, these accounts, fictional and non-fictional, if that is the detail that persists, we've got to remain focused on that one. Keeping that in mind, if you still think that you might be a vampire because that characteristic applies to you, then we can move on to test 2. Test number 2 has 10 questions. Do you sleep in a coffin? Are most of your clothes black? Do you wear an opera cape with a red lining? Do you carry a wolf's head cane? Do you avoid mirrors, garlic, sunlight, and church? Do you have fangs? Do you enjoy biting people on the neck? Do you crave power over others? Do you drink human blood occasionally? Do you believe that drinking human blood will make you look younger? Does the sight or taste of human blood arouse you sexually? Surprise, none of the above questions have anything to do with being a true vampire. You're just a sexual deviant, is basically the conclusion of this chapter. We went over that at length in previous chapters, so I won't rehash that out. But these people simply are fetishists. They might sometimes even genuinely believe that they could be vampires, but they're really just doing cosplay and getting their rocks off. There is the question of whether there's a moral dilemma to be had here. So basically, if you are wanting to obtain blood from unwilling people, yes, you need to stop because you are bordering on psychopaths. But Kaplan isn't overly worried about it because, in his experience, the desire to have a little bit of blood here and there is not equivalent to any desire to actually kill or hurt people. Test 3 is only 3 questions. Do you need to drink human blood every single day? Do you become irritable, aggressive, or frantic if you can't have human blood every day? Do you believe that drinking human blood every day has kept you youthful and will extend your life indefinitely? If you answered yes to even one of these questions, you are what Kaplan calls a true vampire. Of the hundreds of people they interviewed at the Vampire Research Center, only 7 of them fell into this category after all that time. 2 others were potentially true vampires. So those people had key characteristics in common. They needed to drink human blood every single day, as was already stated. This was both a physical need and a psychological need because their bodies and their minds would feel awful if they did not satiate this craving. These people could be desperate for blood and do things such as pay money, trade sex, participate in sadomasochistic rituals, join cults, or even attack unwilling victims just to get the blood. So we're talking about like serious people here, right? These are not cosplay fetishists. These are next level. They need human blood every single day in order to feel normal, and they will do anything to get it. The second characteristic that they share is they're very body conscious, usually very pleasant looking and well groomed. They appear younger than their chronological age. Thirdly, they're convinced that if they stop drinking human blood, they will age and possibly die. They believe human blood is going to extend their lives while keeping them youthful. The fourth characteristic they share is they all have overpowering personalities. They take charge in conversations, get people willingly to do things their way. They're very charismatic, likable, intelligent. They have great conversations. I think we've all met people like this who I don't know that I'd call any of the people I knew like this vampires, but they walk into a room and everybody wants to know them. And they're very beautiful and they're very well put together. And they don't even have to try very hard. Everyone just wants to be around them and hear what they have to say. And I feel like when I look back at these people, I feel like I dated some of them or been very close with some of them. I feel like, oh man, in the moment, I thought that that person was spectacular. But looking back, they're really just not all that special. But there was something about them. And I feel like celebrities really have this going for them where for no good reason, everyone just wants to be around them. And they are very good at also manipulating people, which maybe that's actually the reason. They're very good at being chameleons, at understanding, okay, the person in front of me or the people in front of me want X, Y, and Z from me. So that's what I'm going to deliver in this moment. Obviously, politicians are very good at this. And these people are fucking snakes usually. Doesn't surprise me that people who could possibly be true vampires have this characteristic. Maybe there's a lot to think about with that one. Fifth, they are night people, preferring to work at night, sleep during the day. They can function during the day if they have to, but they don't like to. Interestingly, none of them had ever been married. 2 did have companions of the opposite sex, so maybe it was those 2 sort of outliers, the maybe vampires. None of them said they ever had any children. Every single one of them insisted on total security concerning their identity. Again, we went over that at length. We don't need to hash that out again. It's really quite interesting what a true vampire has wound up looking like. They don't sleep in coffins. They don't dress in weird gothic clothing. They don't have fangs. They don't do anything out of the ordinary. They work. They blend in. They're quite secretive. They actually don't want their identities known. They fake their identities quite often. They literally live in the shadows. They're beautiful. They're not exactly contemptible or murderous. And most importantly, they have an overwhelming need for human blood to be a key part of their diet, if not the only thing that they ingest. I mean, of course, these people are scary to us if they truly exist and they're out there drinking tons of human blood every day, especially like Elizabeth, who says she's out there drinking the blood of 1 to 2 human bodies every single day, and she's killing hers. Who knows if she's real or not, but that's scary if that's the case. And they were able to directly correlate a reported vampire attack to her location in a random weird part of Canada the same time she was there. So they're very scary, potentially for good reason. So Kaplan goes on to compare vampires to drug addicts. Both of them have an overwhelming need for an unusual substance, and both will do absolutely anything to get their hands on it. Both are irrational and irritable and upset when they don't have it, and they'll resort to crime or violence to get this substance. But unlike a drug addict, it doesn't seem like a vampire can really quit their activity. It doesn't seem like this is like a crack addict getting crack, which is something our bodies never needed and cannot produce. They need human blood and they need it like we need food. So I do see what Kaplan's saying here, but this is some next level stuff. This isn't an addiction. This is a carnal need. If they don't have it, they won't survive. That is a little bit different because our reliance on food and water is altogether different than some heroin addicts' reliance upon heroin. And Kaplan gets a little bit ridiculous here. Like, see, this is where I think he's just an academic who spent too much time living in the bubble of academia and not really living in the real world. He goes on to say, oh, perhaps one day, just like we offer counseling and treatment for various drug addicts, perhaps we could have that one day for vampires. Perhaps we can't. This seems like a biological thing that they need. It doesn't seem like this is something they want. It doesn't seem like they have a real good time with it. They live lives that seem very lonely and pointless. Like the only point of their entire day, every day, is to get blood and not get caught. And some of them might be having to kill people to do that. I mean, come on. Like that just goes well beyond, counseling a drug addict when you're talking about somebody who thinks that they need pints and pints and pints of human blood every single day or they're going to die. And he dwells again on, well, why can't they just get it from a blood bank? And it seems like he did ask this question of everyone who he deemed to be a true vampire. Most of them seemed to scoff at it. But one person did actually spend the time to say, look, that's a ridiculous notion. First of all, it's not the same thing. But even if it were the same thing, where am I going to find a doctor who would approve me having a constant blood supply in order for me to drink the blood every single day? And that doctor's not going to report me to the authorities. What doctor in their right mind would even say yes to that? Also, the cost would be insane. Do you know how much a pint of blood costs from a blood bank? The person who he interviewed was like, it sounds okay to you from afar, but to me it sounds ridiculous. Kaplan eventually admits in this chapter that, okay, even if I want them to try to give up their need for blood, it doesn't seem like that's a realistic notion at all. It seems like that's kind of a pipe dream. That's wishful thinking, and it doesn't match up with the reality of the situation. So he does eventually get there with his thinking. Interestingly, when each of these 9 true vampires was asked when their blood drinking began, they did not all have similar answers. 4 of them said they were pretty much born into it. They just always needed human blood, but they wouldn't answer questions about their parents or their families. The remaining 5 said they did not begin to drink human blood until they were well into their teens. And each of them, it was a pretty similar story. They had a cut on their hand or something like that, put their finger to their mouth, stop the bleeding, and then realized, oh man, I really love the taste of this and I need more. And then it just spiraled from there. 2 women in this group mentioned that their introduction was more of a fetishist thing. They were doing some kinky stuff in a group of friends and they got introduced to the concept of the blood drinking and they just loved it. So talking about the blood extraction process when it comes to donors, it becomes a bit of an art. They're often taught by more talented blood drinkers how to obtain the blood by using a razor or similar tools, which veins or arteries you can safely hit, and how to find willing donors. So the last thing we'll talk about for this chapter is Kaplan speaks at length about psychic vampires. Now, I'm going to be super honest here. I find the discussion of psychic vampires to be very significant, but I think it's very boring Because there's just some people that are out there, and yes, for whatever reason, you feel drained after they're around, or you feel like it takes a lot of energy just to kind of talk to them or listen to them. The television show, What We Do in the Shadows, is hilarious. Please watch it. But the guy in that show, Colin, who's a psychic vampire, is the perfect depiction of it. Please watch the show. 10 out of 10 recommend. But yeah, so I'm not going to spend too much time on psychic vampires. They're anything from a drama queen to somebody who's just very boring. And it makes your skin crawl to kind of be around them while they try to tell a joke or tell a story. So I'm not going to put these people, these psychic vampires, in the same category as people who are potentially humanoid or not human. They have a need to drink human blood to survive, and they quite possibly have a whole different physiology than you or I have. I'm just not going to put them in the same category whatsoever. It's just a personality type. I don't even want to entertain it. All right. So the next chapter will be a very sort of academic set of theories around humans and our relationship to blood and what that means for us in incorporating vampires into the very fabric of our culture. All right. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you then.